Dr. Hye-Yun Kim wiped condensation from her mask as she guided the small submersible deeper into the unexplored section of the Mariana Trench. The vessel's lights cut through the darkness, casting eerie shadows across the seafloor. Behind her, Dr. Jae-ho Park monitored the sonar equipment while Sung-Min Lee operated the submersible's mechanical arms. "Something strange on the scanner," Jae-ho said, tapping the screen. "Metal readings. Strong ones." Hye-Yun frowned. "That's impossible. We're 7 miles down and miles from any known shipwreck." The team had been mapping unexplored regions of the trench for 3 weeks. Finding metal at this depth was unusual. Finding the massive reading their equipment showed was unprecedented. "Adjust course 15 degrees north," Hye-Yun instructed. The submersible's lights soon revealed what looked like a smooth rock formation that seemed oddly geometric. "That's not natural," Sung-Min whispered. The formation had straight edges and regular patterns that no natural process could create. Hye-Yun guided the submersible closer. "Take samples." Using the mechanical arm, Sung-Min scraped at the surface. Instead of rock, the outer layer crumbled away to reveal something that gleamed like polished metal. "It's some kind of alloy," Jae-ho said, examining the readings. "Nothing in our database matches it." They spent hours carefully removing sediment, revealing more of the structure. What they uncovered left them speechless: a curved metal wall with markings that resembled writing. "We need to call the surface," Hye-Yun said, her voice tight with excitement and disbelief. Within days, a larger expedition arrived. The Korean Oceanographic Institute sent 3 more submersibles and additional equipment. The team established a temporary research station on a ship directly above the site. Dr. Min Seo Kang, the institute's director, joined them. "Show me everything," she demanded as soon as she arrived. The team presented their findings. The structure was massive, extending hundreds of meters in multiple directions. Ground-penetrating sonar indicated it was part of something even larger buried beneath the seafloor. "It's manufactured," Hye-Yun explained, showing Min Seo the symbols they'd uncovered. "And these markings, they share elements with Proto-Sumerian, Ancient Tamil, and early Chinese scripts, but they predate all of them. It's impossible." "Nothing is impossible, just unexplained," Min Seo replied, examining the photographs. After 2 more days of careful excavation, they uncovered what appeared to be a doorway. The team debated extensively before deciding to attempt entry. "We don't know what's inside," Jae-ho cautioned. "What if we damage something irreplaceable? What if we miss discovering something that changes human history?" Hye-Yun countered. Using the submersible's mechanical arms, they carefully cleared the entrance. The door, remarkably, slid open with just gentle pressure. "It's still operational," Sung-Min whispered in awe. "After who knows how long underwater." The submersible's lights revealed a chamber with control panels and seats designed for human-like occupants. Everything was covered in a thin layer of sediment, but otherwise preserved. "It's a bridge," Hye-Yun said. "A command center." The design was unlike any submarine or ship known to modern humans, yet somehow familiar. The seats and controls were proportioned for human use. As they explored, Hye-Yun noticed a panel that seemed to pulse with faint light beneath the sediment. She guided the submersible's arm to gently clear it. "Be careful," Jae-ho warned. The panel glowed brighter as the sediment was removed. Symbols similar to those on the exterior lit up in sequence. "It's activating," Hye-Yun said, her heart racing. Before they could retreat, the panel flashed brightly. The entire structure hummed to life around them. Lights flickered on throughout the bridge, and dormant screens illuminated with scrolling symbols. "We need to leave," Jae-ho said urgently. But Hye-Yun was transfixed. One screen showed a map of Earth, with pulsing dots in every ocean. "Look at this." The dots seemed to represent locations. As they watched, one dot after another began to glow more intensely. "It's sending signals," Sung-Min realized, "to other sites. Their submersibles communication systems suddenly picked up broadcasts from research vessels and naval ships worldwide. All reported the same phenomenon: unexplained energy signatures emanating from deep ocean locations. Back on the surface, chaos ensued. MinSeo showed them satellite images of disturbed water patterns appearing simultaneously across the globe. "What did we activate?" Jai-Ho asked, his face pale. A call came in from a research vessel near the mid-Atlantic ridge. They were reporting massive movement on the seafloor. Something was rising. When the first images came through, everyone fell silent. A structure similar to what they'd discovered, but much larger, was emerging from the Atlantic. Military vessels converged on the site. "Carbon dating results are back," a lab technician announced, breaking the stunned silence. "The samples from the structure are approximately 152,000 years old." "That's not possible," MinSeo whispered. "Human civilization only goes back about 10,000 years. Ha-Yun stared at the images of the rising structure. "Then who built these?" More reports flooded in. Similar structures rising in the Pacific, the Indian Ocean, even beneath the Antarctic ice shelf. "We need to go back down," Ha-Yun insisted. "Whatever we activated, we need to understand it." Despite objections, Ha-Yun led another dive. This time, they brought specialized equipment to interface with the ship's systems. Inside the bridge, more systems had activated. Screens displayed what appeared to be historical records, images of stars, planets, and what looked like battles. "These aren't alien ships," Ha-Yun realized as she studied the imagery. "Look at the figures operating them." The images showed beings that were unmistakably human, dressed in uniforms with the same symbols they'd found on the ship. "This is our history," she whispered. "A history we've forgotten." As governments worldwide scrambled to respond to the emerging vessels, Ha-Yun's team made their most shocking discovery yet. In a chamber adjacent to the bridge, they found a message encoded in the simplest form of the ship's language, seemingly left for whoever might rediscover it. "When they return, you will need these." The emergency United Nations session erupted into chaos as screens displayed massive objects breaking the ocean surface worldwide. Military leaders shouted over each other, while diplomats demanded explanations no one had. "Silence," Secretary General Choi thundered, banging his gavel. The room quieted. "Dr. Ha-Yun Kim has important information." Ha-Yun stepped to the podium, exhaustion lining her face after 3 sleepless days. Beside her stood Dr. Tae-Ho Yoon, her colleague who specialized in ancient languages. "What we activated wasn't just one ship," she explained. "It was a beacon that awakened an entire fleet of vessels buried in our oceans. Our carbon dating confirms they're approximately 152,000 years old." Gasps and mutters filled the room. "That's impossible," the French representative objected. "Human civilization is barely 10,000 years old." "That's what we thought," Tae-Ho replied. "We were wrong." Ha-Yun displayed images from submarine drones showing massive ships rising from the ocean floor. Some stretched nearly a kilometer in length, with designs unlike anything in modern naval architecture. "The Chinese Navy approached one vessel in the South China Sea," she continued. "When their ships came within 1 kilometer, the vessel activated some kind of energy shield. 2 destroyers were disabled, no casualties, but all electrical systems failed." "Are they attacking us?" demanded the U.S. representative. "No," Tae-Ho said firmly. "They're defending themselves. We've been working to translate the symbols found throughout the vessels. They're not alien ships. They're human in origin." The room erupted again. The Secretary General banged his gavel repeatedly. "Explain," he ordered when order was restored. Ha-Yun showed images from inside the command bridge they'd discovered. "We've managed to access some of their data systems. These ships were built by humans, our ancestors, who possess technology far beyond our current capabilities." Tae-Ho continued, "The ships contain historical archives. Our ancestors weren't primitive. They were an interstellar civilization with colonies on multiple worlds." Then what happened? Someone asked. Hei-yun's expression darkened. War. A war they nearly lost. In the days that followed, military forces worldwide established perimeters around the risen vessels, maintaining the distance that seemed to keep defensive measures inactive. Meanwhile, Hei-yun and Tae-ho led an international team of scientists working around the clock to understand the ship's systems. It's like they designed these interfaces to be intuitive, Tae-ho remarked as they studied the command bridge. They gained access to more of the ship as water was carefully pumped out of compartments, almost as if they knew someone would need to figure it out quickly someday. I think they did know, Hei-yun replied, pointing to a holographic display they'd activated. It showed the timeline of human history, but not the version taught in schools. This timeline extended back 200,000 years, showing advanced cities, space travel, and finally, a devastating war. They buried these ships deliberately, she explained to the UN Scientific Council the next day. According to the archives, humanity faced an enemy they called the Harvesters, beings that systematically stripped planets of resources and biological material. Our ancestors fought them to a standstill, but realized they couldn't win outright. So they executed a desperate plan. They retreated to Earth, buried their technology, and deliberately regressed their civilization. They chose to forget, asked a disbelieving council member. They chose to hide, Tae-ho corrected. The archives indicate the Harvesters had technology that could detect advanced power signatures across vast distances. By going silent, technologically speaking, humanity disappeared from their sensors. Progress accessing the ships accelerated when researchers discovered that certain individuals could interface directly with the ship's systems. Min-ji, a young linguist with no previous technical training, found that when she touched certain panels, the ships responded differently. It's genetic, Hei-yun explained after running tests. Some people carry markers that match the ship's crew profiles. They're descendants of the original pilots. As more of these individuals were identified and brought to the various ships, understanding of the ancient technology grew exponentially. Within weeks, teams could activate basic systems and access more archives. Then came the alarm no one was prepared for. Hei-yun was examining a sensor array when alarms blared throughout the ship. Holographic displays activated automatically, showing long-range scans of the solar system. What's happening? Demanded the military liaison assigned to her team. Tae-ho, who had been working on translating the alert messages, went pale. The long-range sensors detected something approaching our solar system. Multiple somethings. The Harvesters, Hei-yun whispered. They detected the ships when we activated them. Emergency meetings convened worldwide as the news spread. Panic threatened to engulf major cities until a joint broadcast from world leaders called for calm and unity. How long do we have? Secretary General Choi asked during a private briefing. The ship's sensors indicate approximately 6 months before they reach Earth, Hei-yun answered. The archives show the Harvesters move methodically, harvesting each planet in a system before proceeding to the next. They'll start with the outer planets. 6 months to learn how to operate warships that are millennia beyond our technology, General Park said grimly. Can it be done? All eyes turned to Hei-yun and Tae-ho. The ships were designed to be operated by humans, Tae-ho said slowly. And we're finding more people with the genetic markers every day. Our ancestors left us everything we need, Hei-yun added. It's as if they knew this day would come. The question isn't whether we can learn to operate these ships. The question is whether we can become the people our ancestors were, people who faced the Harvesters and survived. As the meeting ended, Hei-yun returned to the original vessel where it all began. In the quiet of the command bridge, she studied the star charts showing the Harvesters' approach. Her ancestors had hidden to survive. Now, humanity would have to remember how to fight. On a screen nearby, an automatic playback activated, showing a final message recorded thousands of years ago. A woman in a captain's uniform looked directly at the camera, her eyes reflecting the same determination He-Yun felt growing inside herself. "If you are seeing this," the ancient captain said, "they've found us again. Remember what we fought for. Remember who we were. The stars are our birthright. Take back what's yours." The moon base, hastily established in an ancient ship's landing bay, buzzed with activity. Dr. He-Yun stood before a holographic display showing 9 red dots moving steadily through the outer solar system. The harvesters had already passed Pluto. "They're faster than we predicted," she said to General Du-Yun, who nodded grimly. "How long now?" 4 months, maybe less," He-Yun replied. 3 months had passed since the detection of the approaching fleet. In that time, humanity had united in ways previously unimaginable. Old conflicts were set aside as resources poured into understanding and operating the ancient vessels. Training centers had been established worldwide, where people with the right genetic markers learned to interface with the ship's systems. Teams worked around the clock to translate technical manuals and battle strategies stored in the data archives. He-Yun turned as Dr. Taiho entered the command center with Jun Seo, a 16-year-old boy who had shown remarkable aptitude for the neural interfaces. "Show her," Taiho urged. Jun Seo stepped forward and placed his hand on the control panel. The holographic display shifted, zooming in on one of the harvester ships. Details appeared, showing weak points and weapon systems. "He's accessing tactical data we couldn't reach before," Taiho explained excitedly. "The younger ones connect more deeply with the systems." He-Yun studied the boy. "How does it feel when you connect?" Jun Seo considered the question. "Like remembering something I never knew I forgot," he said simply. The discovery that children and teenagers often formed stronger neural connections with the ships had been unexpected but welcome. Thousands of young people worldwide now trained alongside adults, forming bridge crews where youth provided the deepest system access, while adults contributed experience and judgment. "The first fleet will be ready for space trials next week," General Du-Yun said, examining reports. 27 ships with full crews. "Out of how many in total?" He-Yun asked. "We've identified 115 vessels worldwide. 83 are operational or close to it." It wasn't enough. The archives indicated that humanity had fielded thousands of ships in the previous war and still barely survived. Now they would face the harvesters with a fraction of that force. Later that night, He-Yun couldn't sleep. She wandered through the ship that had become her home, eventually finding herself in the memorial hall they'd discovered a month earlier. The walls displayed the names and images of those who had died in the ancient war. "Trouble sleeping," came a voice. Minister Kyung-soon stood in the doorway, her face tired. "Just wondering if we have a chance," He-Yun admitted. Kyung-soon joined her, studying the memorial wall. "Did you know my great-granddaughter is training as a weapons officer? She's 14. He-Yun nodded. The involvement of the young had been controversial but necessary. "I asked her if she was scared," Kyung-soon continued. "She said yes, but that's not a reason not to fight." She smiled sadly. "When did our children become so wise?" A week later, He-Yun stood on the bridge of the flagship, now named Remembrance, as it rose from the ocean for the first time. Water cascaded from its massive hull as it broke the surface, then continued rising until it hovered a kilometer above the Pacific. Gravitational systems functioning at 93% efficiency, reported Minho from the engineering station. At 20, he was one of the older crew members, Captain G1, an experienced naval officer who had shown moderate neural compatibility. Nodded. "Take us up slowly." The ship ascended through clouds until the blue sky darkened to black and stars appeared. On screens around the bridge, similar scenes played out as ships worldwide left Earth's atmosphere for the first time in 150,000 years. "Fleet status?" Jai-1 asked. "All 27 vessels reporting success," answered Subin, the communications officer. "Formation established." He-Yun watched from the science station, her heart pounding. Against all odds, they had done it. Returned humanity to space aboard vessels built by their forgotten ancestors. 'This is the last flight,' Jai-1 said. 'We've arrived at the limit of our capacity. Begin weapons testing, Ji-1 ordered. The tests revealed both good and bad news. The ancient weapon systems functioned perfectly, but energy reserves were lower than hoped. The ships had been dormant for too long, and some power cores had degraded. We can only fire the main cannons 3 or 4 times before depletion, He-Yun reported to the Global Command during the debriefing. After that, we're limited to secondary systems. Then we make every shot count, replied Admiral Choi from Lunar Command. Training intensified as the harvesters approached Jupiter. Simulations ran constantly, with crews practicing maneuvers and tactics gleaned from the archives. The ancient humans had left detailed records of harvester strategies and weaknesses. 2 months later, the first engagement occurred near the orbit of Mars. A small scouting party of 3 harvester ships approached, apparently investigating the planet for resources. 5 human vessels, including Remembrance, moved to intercept. He-Yun watched from the bridge as the alien ships came into visual range. They were massive, with irregular shapes that resembled nothing so much as giant insects. They've detected us, Su-bin reported. They're changing course to intercept. Captain Ji-1 stood, his face resolute. Battle stations, remember your training. A harvester ships accelerated suddenly, moving with unexpected speed. Energy weapons fired, missing the human vessels but demonstrating their power as a Martian moon shattered from a glancing hit. Evasive pattern Delta, Ji-1 ordered. The ship responded instantly to Jun Seo's neural commands, moving in ways that would have been impossible with conventional controls. They're splitting up, He-Yun reported, watching the tactical display. Trying to surround us. Just like the archives predicted, Taeho noted from his position analyzing harvester communications. They always used the same tactics. The battle was brief but intense. 2 human ships took damage, but all 3 harvester vessels were destroyed. The last one by Remembrance's main cannon. As they returned to Lunar Base for repairs, He-Yun studied the battle data. They haven't evolved their tactics in 150,000 years, she told the command staff. They fight exactly as our ancestors recorded. That's our advantage, Admiral Choi said. They don't adapt. They don't create. They only consume. And we? Asked Minister Kyung-soon. He-Yun looked around at the diverse group of humans, young and old, from nations that had been enemies just months before, now united in defense of their world. We remember, she said. And we innovate. That's what saved us before. It's what will save us again. The artificial gravity flickered momentarily as the Remembrance took another hit. On the bridge, Captain Ji-1 steadied himself against his command chair, while He-Yun checked the damage reports flooding her screen. We need more translators in the archive section, He-Yun told Taeho over the comm system. The technical manuals for the shield harmonics are still only partially decoded. I'll send who I can spare, he replied, but we're stretched thin since the battle at Europa. 2 months had passed since the first skirmish with the Harvester's scout vessels. The main invasion fleet was now approaching Mars, and humanity's forces were scrambling to prepare. In a large chamber deep within the Remembrance, Professor Ji-Woo Park ran her fingers over symbols etched into what appeared to be a memory crystal. Unlike traditional data storage, these crystals responded to touch and thought patterns. At 53, Ji-Woo was older than most who could interface with the ancient technology, but her connection was among the strongest discovered. Anything? Asked Min-Soo, a young engineer watching hopefully. Ji-Woo nodded slowly, her eyes closed in concentration. It's a personal log. From a science officer named, the closest translation would be bright water. The crystal projected images above their heads, scenes of planets with 3 moons, strange cities with towers that seemed to grow rather than being built, and finally, devastating battle footage. They weren't just warriors, Ji-Woo said softly. Look at this. The projection shifted to show massive libraries, art galleries, and concert halls. The ancient humans had built their civilization on knowledge and beauty, as much as on military might. They were running from the war, Ji-Woo continued, translating the log entry. This science officer was documenting their cultural achievements in case they were lost. Hei Yun entered the archive room, looking tired but determined. "Professor Park, we need your help with the weapons systems. The harvesters have adapted their shields since our last encounter." Jaiwu carefully placed the memory crystal in its storage case. "I found something that might help us understand the phase cannons better. The technical language is complex, but I'm starting to see patterns." As they walked to the weapons control center, they passed a room where young crew members were training. Through the window, Hei Yun saw Jun Seo leading the group of teenagers through neural interface exercises. Their hands moved in perfect synchronization over control panels that responded to their thoughts. "They're so young," Jiwoo remarked sadly. "They connect better with the technology," Hei Yun replied. "Their neural pathways are more adaptable." "That's not what I meant," Jiwoo said. "I meant they shouldn't have to fight a war." Hei Yun had no answer for that. In the weapons center, engineers were attempting to optimize the phase cannon's output. Each ship had limited energy reserves, and efficiency was crucial. "The problem is harmonizing the energy signature with their shield frequency," explained Chief Engineer Seo Jun. "We can penetrate their defenses, but it takes too much power." Jaiwu studied the technical readouts, then placed her hand on a nearby interface panel. The display changed, showing ancient schematics. "The weapons weren't designed to brute force through shields," she said after a moment. "They're meant to. It's hard to translate. Dance with the enemy's energy pattern, then find the resonance point and shatter it. Like finding the resonance frequency of a wine glass," Hei Yun suggested. "Exactly," Jiwoo nodded. "We've been using too much power because we're fighting the shields directly. We need to listen to them instead." On Earth, the global effort continued. Training facilities worked around the clock, preparing crew members for the ships still being reactivated. In a facility near what was once Giza, Dr. Hyun-ki stood before a group of new recruits. "Today we found something remarkable," he told them, excitement evident in his voice despite his exhaustion. "A chamber within the Great Pyramid that connects to the ship buried beneath it. Our ancestors left markers and monuments worldwide, hiding their technology in plain sight." Similar discoveries were happening globally. The ancient ships had not been randomly placed but positioned according to a complex system that turned Earth itself into a defensive grid. Back on the Remembrance, Hei Yun received a transmission from Lunar Command. Admiral Choi's hologram appeared before her. "Dr. Kim, we've decoded more of the historical archives," he said without preamble. "The harvesters weren't targeting us specifically. They harvest all advanced life forms." "We knew that," Hei Yun replied, confused. "What we didn't know is why our ancestors chose Earth as their final stand," the Admiral continued. "Earth wasn't their original homeworld." Hei Yun felt the ground shift beneath her. "What?" "According to the archives, humanity evolved elsewhere. Earth was a colony world, chosen for its biodiversity and distance from harvester territory. When they realized they couldn't win the war conventionally, our ancestors consolidated here, bringing as many species from other worlds as they could. That's why Earth has such diverse life," Hei Yun whispered, understanding dawning. "They were saving as much as possible. They sacrificed their civilization to preserve life itself," Admiral Choi said solemnly. The information changed something fundamental in their approach. They weren't just fighting for humanity's survival, but for all life on Earth, life that their ancestors had gone to extraordinary lengths to protect. In the days that followed, Jiwoo made another breakthrough. Working with Jun Seo and other young interface specialists, she discovered an encrypted section of the main archive that contained personal messages from the ancient commanders. "They left these for us," she told Hei Yun, her voice thick with emotion. "They knew someday the harvesters would return, and they left messages for whoever would have to face them." The ship's main hall was converted into a viewing area where crew members could come to watch the messages from their ancestors. People wept openly as they heard voices from 150,000 years ago speaking directly to them, offering encouragement, tactical advice, and most importantly, hope. One message in particular resonated with everyone who heard it. A woman with captain's insignia looked directly into the recording device and spoke with quiet confidence. "If you're watching this, then you are our descendants, and the enemy we fought has returned. You may feel unprepared. You may feel afraid. That is natural. But know this, the same strength that flows in our veins flows in yours. We chose to hide rather than be exterminated, not from cowardice, but to give you, and all life on Earth, a chance to survive. We sacrificed everything we built so that you could exist. Now it's your turn to stand. Remember who you are. Remember where you come from. The stars were once our home, and they can be again. We believe in you." 3 days later, the main harvester fleet reached Mars. 87 human vessels, crewed by people from every corner of Earth, moved into formation to meet them. On the bridge of the Remembrance, Captain J1 looked at his crew, a mixture of seasoned military officers and young interface specialists, scientists and engineers, all united by a common purpose. "For Earth," he said simply. "For all life. For our ancestors who gave us this chance." As the enemy fleet appeared on their sensors, Hei-Yun thought of the ancient captain's message. "Remember who you are. Remember where you come from." "We remember," she whispered as the ships moved forward to engage the enemy. The red dust of Mars drifted past the viewports as the human fleet took its position. 87 ships against over 200 harvester vessels. The odds were poor, but humanity had no choice. On the bridge of the Remembrance, Captain Jaiwan studied the tactical display. The harvester ships moved in their typical formation, a giant sphere with the largest command vessels protected at the center. "They never change," Hei-Yun observed. "Same tactics they used 150,000 years ago." "That's our advantage," Jaiwan replied. "Ready, Professor Park?" Jawu nodded from her station. Her discovery about the resonance frequencies of harvester shields had been implemented across the fleet. All ships report ready with the new targeting protocols. "Jun Seo, status of the neural network?" Jaiwan asked. The young man's eyes were closed as he maintained connection with the fleet's interface specialists. "All ships linked and synchronized, Captain." What Jiwoo and Hei-Yun had discovered in the final days before battle had changed everything. The ancient ships weren't meant to fight as individual vessels, but as a unified force, their systems linked through the neural interfaces of their crews. "Begin approach," Jaiwan ordered. "Execute formation sunburst." The human fleet, which had been arranged in a simple line, suddenly split into 7 distinct groups that moved in different directions. The harvester sphere adjusted, extending tendrils of ships to intercept each group. "They're taking the bait," Taiho reported from Tactical. "Exactly as predicted." As the harvesters split their forces, Jun Seo opened his eyes. "Neural link at full capacity. All ships report ready for Phase 1. Jaiwan nodded. "Execute." Across the human fleet, young interface specialists synchronized their thoughts. The ships responded as one, each firing precisely calibrated energy pulses at specific harvester vessels. The pulses weren't direct attacks but probes, gathering data on shield frequencies. "Data received," Jiwoo announced. "Processing resonance patterns now." The harvesters, apparently confused by the non-damaging attacks, hesitated briefly before launching their own assault. Energy beams lashed out, striking several human ships. Damage reports flooded in. 3 ships heavily damaged. Subin reported from communications. Crews evacuating to backup vessels. Resonance patterns identified. Jiwoo called out, transmitting targeting solutions to all ships. Jaiwan stood from his command chair. "All vessels, execute Phase 2. What happened next astounded even those who had planned the maneuver. The human fleet's formation, which had seemed random and scattered, suddenly revealed its purpose. Each ship fired precisely targeted energy beams that intersected with beams from other vessels. Where they crossed, the energy amplified and modulated to the exact resonance frequency of the targeted harvester shields. The results were devastating. Harvester ships, their shields collapsed by the precisely tuned attack, were torn apart by secondary weapons fire. Nearly 40 enemy vessels were destroyed in the first coordinated strike. They're regrouping, Taiho warned as the surviving harvester ships pulled back toward their command vessels. As expected, Jai-1 replied calmly. Phase 3. The human fleet regrouped into a tight formation with the Remembrance at its center. Energy began to build as each ship channeled power through the neural network. What one ship couldn't accomplish alone, many could do together. The harvesters launched a massive counterattack, energy weapons firing in unison at the human formation. Shields holding, reported Chief Engineer Seojun, though strain showed on his face as he helped regulate the power flow. Neural synchronization at maximum, Jun Seo announced, sweat beading on his forehead from the mental effort. Hei-Yun watched the energy readings climb to levels she hadn't believed possible. The ships weren't just functioning as their ancestors had designed. They were exceeding those specifications through the perfect neural synchronization of their young crew members. Now, Jai-1 ordered. The combined energy of 84 ships channeled through the Remembrance. A massive pulse of energy erupted from the flagship, expanding in a wave that washed over the harvester fleet. As it touched each enemy vessel, their shields vibrated, resonated, and shattered. For a moment, silence fell across the bridge. Then the tactical display updated, showing more than half the enemy fleet disabled, their systems overloaded by the resonance pulse. All ships, engage remaining targets, Jai-1 ordered, his voice calm despite the extraordinary success. The battle that followed was shorter than anyone had dared hope. Without their shields, the harvesters' technological advantage evaporated. Human ships, though taking damage, systematically destroyed the command vessels at the enemy fleet's center. 3 hours after the battle began, Admiral Choi's voice came over the fleet-wide channel. The remaining harvester vessels are retreating. I repeat, they are retreating from the solar system. Cheers erupted throughout the fleet. On the Remembrance's bridge, exhausted crew members embraced. Jun Seo slumped in his chair, mentally drained but smiling. Ji-woo wiped tears from her eyes as Hei-Yun squeezed her shoulder. We did it, Hei-Yun whispered. Our ancestors would be proud. 2 months later, Hei-Yun stood on the observation deck of the newly established Mars base. The red planet had become humanity's first step back into the solar system. Ships regularly traveled between Earth, Mars, and the Lunar Command Center as people embraced their rediscovered heritage as a spacefaring species. Ready for the ceremony? Taiho asked, joining her at the viewport. Hei-Yun nodded. Below, a crowd had gathered for the dedication of the memorial, a monument to both their ancient ancestors and those who had fallen in the recent battle. As they walked to the ceremony, Hei-Yun reflected on how much had changed. Nations that had been enemies now worked together. Young people who had connected with the ancient technology were teaching others. The ships, once weapons of war, were being repurposed for exploration. We found something new in the archives yesterday, Taiho told her as they walked. Star charts showing human colonies that might still exist, places our ancestors settled before the first Harvester War. You think after all this time, Hei-Yun began. Who knows, but we should find out, he replied with a smile. The ceremony was simple but powerful. Leaders from across Earth stood with the crews who had fought the harvesters. Admiral Choi unveiled the memorial, a spiral of metal and stone with names etched in both modern languages and the ancient script of their ancestors. We gather here not just to remember, but to look forward, the Admiral said. Our ancestors hid to preserve life. They buried their technology and their history so that Earth could survive. But they left us the means to defend ourselves when the time came. Now we have a choice about what to do with this second chance. He gestured to the ships visible in orbit above them. We could use these vessels to conquer, to take, to harvest, becoming no better than the enemy we defeated. Or we can choose a different path. Jun Seo stepped forward, now bearing the rank of lieutenant despite his youth. Our ancestors were not just warriors. They were explorers, artists, scientists. They valued all life, not just human life. That's why they chose Earth as their final stand, to protect its diversity. Minister Kyung-soon, whose great-granddaughter had served aboard one of the ships, spoke next. We have been given two legacies, the wisdom of our modern civilization, built slowly over thousands of years, and the rediscovered knowledge of our ancient past. Both have value. Both will guide us forward. As the ceremony concluded, Hei-yun found herself standing beside Ji-woo, watching the sunset paint Mars sky in shades of orange and pink. What will you do now? Ji-woo asked. Hei-yun smiled. The remembrance is being refitted for deep space exploration. Captain Ji-won asked me to serve as science officer for a mission to look for those lost colonies. The circle completes, Ji-woo replied with a nod. Our ancestors fled to save us. Now we go to find what they left behind. Above them, stars began to appear in the darkening sky, not just distant points of light now, but potential destinations. Humanity had remembered its past and reclaimed its legacy. The future stretched before them, vast and full of possibility. The end.